All right, we have everybody here. I think Ms. Scales Harris is on the line. Hey, Madeline. All right, so we will call the July 15th, 2020 meeting of our Murfreesboro City Council. This is our workshop. If you will, just bow with me. Father, I thank you for this day, this chance that we get to come together. Lord, give us guidance in the decisions that we make. Give us the ability to see through all the clutter and chaos to make decisions that are fitting you. We ask all this in your name. Amen. Stand for pledge allegiance. Pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Right. All right, you have under action items, you have a few things. You have the Planning Commission recommendations, and this came from planning staff.
Thank you, Mayor McFarland, and good afternoon, Mayor McFarland and members of council. We have a couple of items that were heard by the Planning Commission last week that we need to schedule for public hearings. We would recommend public hearing date of August the 20th for these two items. They can both be handled easily in one night. Be happy to answer any questions.
I'll move for approval. Second.
Motion second. Try please call the roll.
Vice Mayor Scales Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance.
Aye.
Mr. Martin.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Mr. Wade.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
Aye.
Thank you.
Didn't miss me.
Oh, I didn't see you. I didn't write you down because I thought you weren't here.
Oh.
Mr. Shacklett.
Aye.
Thank you. I'll fix my list.
I see you behind the mask. It hurts. It hurts.
I'm sorry. I got you.
In trying to be judicious with our staff's time, I know Chad wants to get back to work at the airport. He's got a small grant that big grant's a good grant. So Chad, we want to let you
Thank you very much.
go back.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. And members of the City Council, we have the annual state airport maintenance grant, which is $15,000, and the state assists us with 90% of our safety and maintenance of the airport each year.
We have a motion to approve, please? Yes. There's a motion and second. Ms. Wright, please call the roll.
Vice Mayor Scales Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance.
Aye.
Mr. Martin.
Aye.
Mr. Shacklett.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Mr. Wade.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
Aye. Free to go, Chad.
All right, excellent. Thank you.
All right, workshop items. The first thing we want to hit is the designation of individuals to serve on the Middle Tennessee Electric Membership Board of Directors, the board's nominating committee, and the Sharing Foundation. Greg, I don't have my sheet here. I'll just look at my thing here on the iPad. So had per the sale of the sale, we can appoint two people to that board, and recommending one that you already know for continuity, recommending Ross Bradley from the Murfreesboro Electric Board. Ross served for many years. He was part of the real estate committee. He also chaired the information technology committee, the fiber committee. So Ross has got lots of background. And then, looking at the board, I thought it was important not only to have a female on the board, but I thought it was important to have minority representation on the board. And so Dr. Shawn Brown, who lives on Winterberry Court, she is a orthopedic surgeon at TOA and works in the hospital. Her CV is in front of you, so you can see it's quite extensive on everything that she has. As a matter of fact, I think it's 6 pages of her education, everything that she has, she's done. She's affiliated with Stonecrest Medical Center, MTMC, and Middle Tennessee Ambulatory Surgery Center, as well as St. Thomas. So I am totally fine. I know this was on the agenda, but you haven't seen her resume, so I'm totally fine if y'all want to wait on this until next week or to discuss, or if you want to talk about it now. We have to do this through the end of July. I'm also recommending on the nominating committee recommending Richard Stone, who served on the board. So the nominating committee would be responsible for the nominations to the board for the elections, and also Irene McDonald, who served on the Murfreesboro Electric Board, to the sharing, basically the charitable foundation board for a sharing change board of directors, and that's Irene Pitts McDonald would be recommended to that board. Any discussion? God bless you, Kurt.
Thank you.
We need to have you tested now.
I'll just make a quick comment about Dr. Brown. I do know her personally. I've had personal experience in dealing with her, and probably a 10-year plus relationship, and very thoughtful, very competent, not only medically, but has her own mind, and I think would be a great advocate. So I think it's a great recommendation.
Shane, did Rick Hardesty show any interest at all in the position?
Yeah, talk to Rick, and Rick has got a lot going on with Bunny, or with the bakery right now, and Rick, I talked to him, and Craig talked to him, and he didn't feel like he could.
He was concerned time-wise, just because Lewis Brothers has got him really busy.
He's just done such an excellent job of
He has.
chairing the electric board and power board for so long that I didn't want to just
Yeah.
simply overlook his name.
I want to make sure everyone knows. I do think it's important that many of the people that are on that board have served. 15 years ago, our electric company was not near in the shape that it was when we sold it, and had these discussions 2 years ago. As a matter of fact, I think we went from, with the board changes, we were in a much different position. So I think it's fitting. We need to have the power board to the council to recognize them now that that board is going away, to recognize them for their work that they've put in. And I don't know that many people in the community would even know who's on the power board, but Ross Bradley, Rick Hardesty, Richard Stone, Irene Pitts McDonald, and then I served, Eddie served, and I think Rick is serving right now. So we've
For
had
a few more minutes.
Yep, for a lot of people on that board who've worked over the last many years to get it to the shape that it is.
And the term of these two individuals?
They still would have to go through, they're considered temporary appointments.
They're interim board representatives until they're accepted by the board.
So the next time they have a board election, they would,
So then they become board members after they're accepted by the board, and then the next time they do stand for election, they need to change their bylaws. They'll create a sub-district, and then there'll be an election for the board members on there.
so in this
it's about a
interim time-
2-year.
in this interim time, they don't vote, or what is it?
When they're interim board representatives, they're advisory until they're accepted by the board, and I forget the period of time. There's a short period of time, and then they become board members.
And they still,
And maybe when they create the sub-districts before they become voting board members, because they need to have the sub-districts in place.
and that was one of the things on the nominating, because I know we had, I had a conversation on, these being placeholders, but technically, Craig, unless I'm wrong, they are placeholders until the election. They will, if they decide that they want to run again, they will be nominated and have to run again. So they're not just,
Through the nomination.
yeah, they're not handpicked to stay on there as long as they want to. They will have to go through a formal nominating and election process.
So talk about clarified timelines for that. So how long are they in the advisory board capacity, and when will the actual election be?
They're gonna have to pull it up. You don't remember?
I was going to pull it up too.
Yeah, we'll have to pull up the agreement real quick, and
I think if I remember the way the agreement was written, they serve for a year until the next board election. So although they are handpicked by the council, they still have to go through the election process just like every other nominated person who wanted to run will run. So that's why we also have representation from the city on the nominating board, which is Richard Stone. So Richard would I assume listen to council members, or, I mean, for that matter, it's a member-owned corporation, so they would listen to the members of the corporation as well.
As far as you know, though, it was what we agreed on originally during the process of the sale, right? I mean, there's no kind of new time frames or anything like that. Which I can't remember the actual timeline either, but I do remember when we thought through that at the time, and I seem to think it was okay at the time.
Initially, it was just one. Remember, It was initially just one board member, and we
got
negotiated to get 2 board members, and the nominating committee, and the charitable foundation.
Well, can we knock out the nomination without necessarily knowing that? So whatever the timeline is, we just basically are saying we agree on this is who will say it is. Is that something?
Right. So the interim board representatives, which is what you're appointing now, they participate in advisory capacity. I'm skipping through a bunch of words here. Until the board amends their organizational documents, which they're going to do very quickly, to enlarge the number of their seats on the boards, because they have to comply with the corporate laws. So they'll enlarge the seats, and once they enlarge the seats, there'll be board members at that point in time. And the next annual meeting, they will create the 2 sub-districts, and they'll be filled by the nominating committee. And then at that point in time, the nominating committee will fill the positions by appointment of 2 persons, not mutually.
I think August was the annual.
Right, and then, we're going to create, it's hard to read these things and skip all the words.
I think they were really.
Why you have attorneys?
Sitting here.
More words.
I mean,
attorney, yes. You're paid by the word.
you guys would rather, that's the 2 recommendations, so we could get the overall, the one that we need to appoint today would be dissolution of the Power Board and appointment of the MED Pension Commission. I just wanted to give you guys, this is who recommending. I don't think we could find 2 better people to serve that have got so if we want to wait until the next meeting, we have to do this by the end of July if we want to wait to the next meeting, but that's.
I'm okay moving along with it.
I'm
cool waiting if everybody wants to wait
Totally
too.
up to y'all.
I'm just thinking that, they may have an annual election and nominate annually, but I'm assuming that they probably have staggered terms or something. So we may need to look at the possibility of having a 1 candidate and a 2 candidate, one for the longer terms, if that's the case, so that. And if that were the case, then I would suggest Ross Bradley as the 1 and Miss Brown as the 2, or Dr. Brown as the 2, because of his board experience as on the Power Board.
Look, generally corporate boards elect everybody annually.
Annually?
So,
Okay.
yeah,
If that's the case,
don't
then
generally
it's not
have
even a concern.
staggered terms.
Okay.
I haven't read their corporate documents.
How about we
but
do this? How about if we could get a motion on recommending these 2 contingent upon the information coming back on when the elections would be, and then that way staff could bring that back, and that way it
I
would
have
be.
it here, but
That makes sense.
go ahead.
Would it be okay?
I'll make that motion.
All right, have a motion.
Second that.
Motion and second. This would be for all 4 people that we're recommending to the 3 different boards. Ms. Wright, please call the roll.
Vice Mayor Skels Harris. Aye. Mr. LaLance.
Aye.
Mr. Martin.
Aye.
Mr. Shacklet.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
All right.
Mr. Wade.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
All right, we now have before you the dissolution of the Power Board and appointment of the MED Pension Committee. Craig.
Yeah, so the Power Board, they don't have anything left to do. Under the ordinance, they still have responsibilities, so we need to alleviate those responsibilities from the board. And part of what the board served as was the MED Pension Committee on the separate pension plan that MED has. And so what we'd like for council to do is, under the plan's term, you can remove a board and replace it. And since we're really going into an administrative process with the MED pension to, as the document said, to do what's called a pension risk transfer it to another financial organization to keep the plan going. And so to administer that, what we'd like to do is to appoint Melissa, myself, and then Jackie Whitaker as a representative of someone in the plan on that pension committee. And then, we'll watch the financial analysis of that until it gets to a point where it makes sense to transfer that pension risk.
Any questions?
Yeah, I had a couple questions. So, and this may be intentional, but with PD's background and experience and Lori's background and experience, is there a reason one of those were not selected to represent MED on there?
No reason. We wanted to just pick a representative, so we picked a long-term serving employee.
Well, I guess my thing is, I'm not aware, and this may be my experience, but what other committee are you on outside of this? Would you be on outside of this? So that was a little strange to me when I saw it.
Pension.
Pension.
Yeah, the city manager chairs the pension, our pension.
No. Well, only because I'm not in the pension plan. City
Oh, that's
manager
right.
did before.
The city manager did before.
Okay.
But
Yeah.
since I'm not in the plan, I don't serve on the committee anymore.
So that was a question. And then about Lori or PD, just because of their experience and their being CFO in the MED plan. And then lastly, it was sort of a small group. I mean, are we comfortable with it being that small? Just a question. So.
Well, I think that we wanted to make it because it's a plan that's overfunded. It's quite a bit overfunded, and it doesn't need any further contributions for a long time, even if it earned no income whatsoever and everybody maxed out the pension. So it's in great shape, and really the thought now is we're watching the market. It's tied to corporate bonds, but once the corporate bond rates go up, then it's a quick transfer, hopefully for little funding out of the plan, or zero funding out of the plan to transfer it out. So the thought was to make it as efficient as possible to get that done, because that's the way we structured the agreement with Middle Tennessee, because they're going to contribute to that. So we didn't feel like. I didn't feel like we needed a large board because there's really no decisions to be made. We want to watch the investment decisions. They've been successful. There's no reason to change anything in there. We have the actuarial firm, the same firm that the city uses. So we would continue all those relationships, monitor the plan, but really put an effort into figuring out when it was best to transfer that plan, like other plans are. This is a very small plan. We're trying to be cautious because actually it's small. There's a difficulty in the market to even sell it because it's so small. But we're looking for a lot of efficiency out of there without spending a lot of time on committee meetings and things like that really don't add a whole lot to this plan. They haven't for quite some time.
If y'all felt comfortable that we wanted to put another person on there, I don't think that would.
Hello?
Can you hear us?
I have a comment.
Go ahead.
Yes, I'm sorry, my reception on my end, I'm sorry, I'm hearing just about every other word. It's terrible today. I apologize. I don't know why, but on this subject, because the minimum amount of people that can be on this board is 3, I would like to see a financial person from the prior Murfreesboro Electric be on that just for the financial. From a financial standpoint, someone like Lori Williams or PD or someone like that, I think it'll be very wise to add one more person with that financial background and financial about, the pension that they had. I just think it'll be wise that we add one more person, and I would like to see that done.
Does anybody have an indication whether or not they'd be willing to serve? You know if they'd be willing to serve, Madeline?
I'm sorry, Rick.
Do you know if they would be willing to serve? Either of them?
Oh, I'm sure they would.
They're on the plan, so.
I would be shocked if they were not, because that's their field. They eat and sleep finance. So I'm sure they would be glad to serve.
Just generally speaking, I don't, look, it makes sense to me. I don't care, it's
And
not-
maybe with Lori, because PD, I'm sure both of them have very, very important jobs, but maybe Lori Williams, because I think she's the one that usually gives us information when we inquire about something financial. She's the one that gathers all that information. So maybe Lori, I think, would be the best one.
It brings up a good point, and I, I'm kind of sitting here thinking through who was the pension, Ross, I think, was the head of the pension committee as MED. I wonder if that makes sense, especially based on his link to Middle Tennessee. If we're going to, I don't know that it needs, I get what you're saying, agree that there's not going to be a whole lot of, it doesn't sound like there's going to be a whole lot of decisioning in this, but I certainly don't. If somebody's willing to serve in any capacity, I'm not going to, but it could be either.
We just go back and see if she's willing to serve.
Yeah, because we got to make sure any of these people are even willing to serve before we start nominating more people. So I'm good if we want to. Let me ask two general questions about just setting up a board. One would be an odd number versus even number on the board. Sometimes I think having even numbers can create some difficulty in decisioning. So if we're going to go from 3, do we go to 5? Secondly, would be, generally speaking, do you want to have somebody that is a participant on the board, or is it better to not have some people that are participants for something like this?
We changed about 10 years ago our pension committee because we didn't have necessarily employee representation that was on there. So we
remember that.
Yeah. So, I think it would make sense if we did. Typically, you're not going to have anyone. There we go. I think Ross would be a great idea, and I'm sure Ross would serve if.
He'd probably do it.
Yeah.
I'm sure he would.
He would do it.
Why don't we just would someone make a motion to add Ross to that, and then we'll do that contingent upon his acceptance? That'd be I think that's a great.
I would like, I agree with Rick, when it comes to voting power, so it won't be tied. I'd like to see us put Lori and Ross on, because here again, Lori, that's her background. She's done it for 30-something years. That's her background, and I think she definitely should be on that board.
We probably need to talk to her first. Okay. That would be my thought process.
I think she's expressed an interest to do it anyway. So, to Erin, she said that she would. So I'm sure she'd be fine. I'm sure Ross would do it. We do have an annual meeting coming up, and Pinnacle needs direction. So we do need to decide what we're going to do. Otherwise, we'd be pulling in board members.
Make the motion here.
Yeah, whatever. We have 5
Does
people on.
Pinnacle have the? Pinnacle is who handles.
Pinnacle's the investment advisor.
They're the trust manager.
The trust manager.
And they need somebody appointed to deal with them now that taking over.
Both of them? Both?
Not even.
Okay, so can we get a motion to add Lori and Ross contingent upon their acceptance?
So moved.
Second.
All right, Ms. Wright, please call the roll.
Vice Mayor Scales Harris.
Aye.
Mr. LaLance.
Aye.
Mr. Martin.
Aye.
Mr. Shacklet.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Mr. Wade.
Aye.
Mayor McFarland.
Aye. All right, Murfreesboro Electric Department sale proceeds. So, talk
Mayor, before we go into the sale, can I just ask something? I just want to put it on record that there was something posted that Councilman Wade wanted to spend MED money. And I want to make sure, have I asked you to spend MED money on a hockey rink?
No.
Have I asked you to spend MED money on a hockey rink?
No, there's been no
I just want to
discussion.
clarify that, because it has been posted and it's been out there in the news media that I wanted to say that I wanted to spend money, MED money, on a hockey rink. So, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
There's a lot of untruths being posted right now, Kurt. Welcome to the bus.
It's campaign time.
Can you sue people for posting stuff that's not true?
Well,
on.
this is America. You can sue anybody for anything.
I mean, is
but,
it illegal to
uh,
post something that's not true?
It's not a very good lawsuit, particularly in the middle of a political campaign.
Is it legal or illegal, Adam?
It's not, you're getting into a defamation issue, and with defamation in public officials, it's very difficult to win a defamation lawsuit in this country. I'm not saying it's impossible, it's just very, very difficult.
I remember
It's a
this.
hard term.
I remember this from law school, but wasn't it Flint versus Falwell was the?
That is one of them. Then there's New York Times versus Sullivan, or Sullivan versus New York
I wanted you to
Times.
be
Like
impressed.
libel and
Impressive.
slander,
Yeah.
or slander and
impressive.
libel,
Y'all
those
can
kind of things.
All right, let's
were
move.
decided after I
Let's
went to law
move.
school.
Yes, sir. Yeah.
Let me. This is not related to that issue, so let me go back just a little bit. When we negotiated this sale and all, we talked about at one time it was a brief kind of understanding about what was happening with the pension program and benefits for retirees, and I just want to give some consideration to. Let's give some thought to having, not arbitrarily pulling benefits or whatever. I'd like to know what the cost of continuing what they basically have been given. I'd like to know what we're taking away, instead of someone just saying we're going to take a certain benefit away because it's not offered in our plan. We're bringing them under our benefits package, and I understand that. I just want to make sure that we understand that it's not apples to apples when these people that have been on a certain.
Well, we can talk about it, but I want to draw a clear distinction because the pension plan is not. I think
It's
what
not
you're
related
referring
to
to.
that. I
So the
understand.
pension plan is a set plan, and that doesn't
It's
change,
done.
and
It
that goes
happens.
forward.
Yes, it's a contract.
Right. And so what we're talking about, I think, and what you're referring to is
Right.
what's called OPEB, the other post-employment benefits,
Right.
which is essentially the health care and what we
Right.
provide to our retirees. And there are changes that were talked about as part of the sale, and we are communicating with the retirees to the extent that we know, because those change every year. And as a matter of fact, they may change mid-year this year once we sit down and start to talk about it in September or October. So a lot of times we just don't have the information entirely, but we are working very hard to make sure they don't change before the end of the year, to give us a period of time to talk to them. That's not an enormous cost. It's actually below, it's within my authority to do it, because, for example, the under 65 group, it's $733 to make sure they don't have any changes to go through the year.
That's
So,
for
I mean,
everybody.
we're not talking about any kind of numbers, but we want to give them a period of time to understand what may change on the health care, what has to change on here. Some are under a state plan. We just cannot continue. But we're happy to bring counsel the information. We're communicating with retirees to the extent that we know. It's a group that we understand is very sensitive to change. I mean, we're well aware of that. But if we don't have answers to questions, we can't give them the answers. And
I just wanted to be in that, I think council to be in the loop of that, because the questions is that, the assumption when somebody doesn't understand it is that we're doing something that we haven't made it clear that was
Right.
going to happen. And I just want to make sure that we understand why the transition is a little different than what being exactly the same. And because when questions come to us, and that just, as long as we're in the loop of that, I think there's no problem.
yeah, we can send information to council about that.
I'll make,
To the
can I
extent
make
that
a
we
comment
can,
about
that we know.
Make a comment about that just too, because this is how I sort of understood it. Was I understood that there were going to be some changes here and there, but the general idea was to try to not have a negative impact. So
Right.
where you might have a little change to your health plan, you might get a different change. If you have a negative change over here, you got a positive change over there that sort of offsets that. I mean, as we think through this, I mean, for my purposes, as far as what I would want to look at is, I'm willing to look at kind of a net number, what your total package looks like as an employee, and that's the part that I would want us to see that doesn't have a real, I think we all knew there would be some changes. I just, I think we all also have a desire not to see that all be negative changes. So,
No, and we're working hard, and it's not all negative changes, but I guess, for lack of a better term, it's a matter of perspective. I mean, some changes are for example, there's a lot broader group of doctors you can go to under the plan. Now, there may be a financial change where someone discounts the fact that they have more doctors because they're happy with their doctors. They don't need to change the doctors, but there's so, it doesn't always equate dollar to dollar on the plans. But there are some plans that just have to change and then brought into our OPEB. And I think we'd have to go back and I'm not sure we can carve out exceptions as we go through in our retiree plans. To the extent that we can, we certainly will. We're not talking about a large group, and we're not talking about, relatively speaking, a huge amount of money. So, we'll do the best we can. It's like I said, it's a group that doesn't handle change well, so you're likely to hear about any change.
Keep us informed about it. I think would be the key. Let's make sure we at least have our perspective on it, so that we know what we're getting talked to about.
Right, and we're continuing to gather the information we can on that, and some of this is going to be a decision that will come to council that will impact our decisions of that and may impact our employees in the September-October timeframe when we talk about where our finances are. Because if you recall, we had mentioned that this year, based on the information our consultants provide us, we should be looking at an increase in our employee contributions. And we didn't do that this year. But that's just more or less pushing it down the road where we're just going to have to do it at some point in time and maybe to a larger extent. But these are things that change every single year. And frankly, they've changed every single year. They have to be approved every single year for MED. So it was a year-by-year decision that was made for that group as well. So, yeah, we'll keep doing that. We'll keep council in the loop with that and to any kind of significant changes that are in there.
On the Murfreesboro Electric Department sale proceeds, I talked to Craig this morning and thought something that may be, before we start diving into specifics, we don't have necessarily a plan that says this is exactly how we're going to spend it. So we really have, and what I wanted to get council's opinion before we can get staff recommendations on everything else is, we really have three options. So option one is spend it all. You have a the CIP plan, you can spend it. Option two would be save all of it and don't do anything with it. And then option three is a hybrid, where you would look at what we have been receiving from Murfreesboro Electric in taxes in lieu of payment in lieu of taxes. Then now see what's going to be coming in with Middle Tennessee Electric, because we had figured that number coming in was going to be pretty close to $2 million a year, but based on the appraisals that may be coming back or that we're getting that we didn't originally, we're not going to have to do, that number may be closer to $3 million a year, so it may be really close that we're getting the exact same amount that we were getting from Murphy.
See what the appraisals come back. These are properties that have never been appraised before.
So all those properties now have to go back on the tax roll, which is something that, it is good to consider that all of these properties that we did have were not on the tax roll, and now they're going back on the tax roll. So we would have a hybrid model that would be the money that's going to be coming in from Middle Tennessee Electric on a yearly basis that would go back into the general fund that we normally would budget for from Murfreesboro Electric, and then direct staff on the hybrid model to come up with how much that we would want to save and keep in whatever the legal fund would be to do that, and then from there determine what's a good basis that we would keep, almost like I don't want to say a home equity line, but something that we would say, here's what our base is, and we never want to go below that base. And I think what's the important thing when I was explaining this to Ashley, 15 years from now, the likelihood that any of us are going to be sitting here is zero. In 15 years from now, no matter what someone says out wherever that hasn't studied this, there's going to be a council that's going to be sitting here 15 years from now with $250 or $300 million sitting as an annuity coming in, and there won't have to be discussions on tax increases and those things because of the decisions that were made. So those are really our three options. And what I wanted to get council's opinion to say, which of those three do you want staff to start researching and come back and give us plans on? Here's recommendations that then we could start getting into the details on how much do we want to save, how much do we want to spend, and let them come back. Because, right now we've got the CIP summary, and we've got, a 15-year investment that shows, not counting interest, we'll have $272 million that come back, but we really need to come up with an investment structure. Does that make sense? Matt, I don't want to take all the credit. That was also, Rick had a good point that he had brought up to Craig about this same thing, that, us trying to decide today how we're going to spend the money, we really need to come up with the game plan on what we're going to go first. So I thought it'd be good. I think the hybrid model is the best model. I don't want to spend all of it, and I also don't think we can save every single penny legally. So, Bill, do you have
It seems more reasonable to me to think of a hybrid model.
Okay. Eddie?
Absolutely hybrid. We need to focus on trying to pay down debt as we can. We need to focus on making sure that we have the reoccurring income that we had while we had Middle Tennessee or Murfreesboro Electric, and we need to address some of the issues that are ending right now that are important as far as traffic projects and stuff like that, to make sure that we're focusing on making sure that the things that our citizens are complaining about most, that we try to address those.
Ronnie?
I think I would not have an aversion to a hybrid model. I think I'm probably going to lean toward preserving the majority of the money rather than using the money. And a lot of that, that's the hard thing to do, because, you see opportunity and shiny things of what you can do, and it's real easy to want to do that. It just is, man.
Yeah.
And what I would feel really good about, rather than having a road today or fixing a problem today, is someone saying 15 years from now, had the council not made the decision to set this money aside, we could find ourselves in a very difficult situation. And the other piece of that for me is, how did we get a backlog in CIP projects? So how did that get sourced? Where did that come from? Was there not enough revenue? Were we not investing in the right projects? Until I have a better understanding for that, are we growing too fast? Should we not be as pro-growth as we are? And I'm not challenging any of those things. I'm just saying, without an answer to how we got ourselves in the situation, I wouldn't be for spending any money to solve the problem. I'd be for setting it aside to make sure that the annuity of the income is there forever. And that doesn't mean I wouldn't be willing to consider a hybrid model of some of that, but I would lean more towards the majority of it being set aside.
I agree with Ronnie. Hybrid, it just depends on how we're going to spend the money.
Yeah, I think part of what part of how I was thinking about this was similar, like I was saying to Craig, is that I think the hybrid is clearly where I would be on it. The thing that now I think if we're all kind of leaning towards hybrid, now we got to sort of we got to think about, okay, well, how much hybrid are we talking about to each side of the equation, right? I mean, because this is pretty clear cut. I think it's it's not exactly clear cut because of the pay structure, because we got this amortized basically. And so it's not like you just got this one chunk that you can say, okay, we're going to set aside this amount right now and we're going to spend this amount right now. It's not quite that simple, but I think if we look at it in terms of, we're trying to achieve a goal 15 years from now. And, like just for example, and this may or may not be where everybody is on this or whatever, but, if this total number that we know is going to come in is $300 million, if one of us was to say, or four of us was to say whatever, and I'm not even saying us, four of our group say, look, we want to get $200 million of those $300. We want to have that automatically go to a category that is a, either this trust category or whatever this category is that's pretty well tied up. However, we can figure out how to do that legally and all those things, invested, tied up, and then return a stream of income, and then we're willing to spend, leave the other 100 to be spent. Whatever that number looks like, we got to kind of figure out, I think, among us, because that's really where, Craig is going to have, Craig, Melissa, Aaron, from a budgeting and all that kind of standpoint, that's what they need to know from us, I think, right? I mean, is that because if we just say we want a hybrid, well, that can mean we're going to put $10 million away forever and spend $290 million.
So the thought was if we come back and tell them we have a hybrid, then they could come back with almost like Craig did with us during the budget to give us different models to say, here's what happens if you say 200, here's what happens if you spend 100, here's how we would allocate that, and really let them come forward to say over the next 10 years, this is how we would do that.
I think that's the best
That sounds
question.
great.
Yeah.
That sounds wonderful. And I've said this all the way back to the discussion during the discussion period at MED, while we were talking about the MED thing, is that my goal was probably driven towards the road situation. I mean, I completely agree with Ronnie from a standpoint of how we got there and what we need to do. And I think I talked about that a lot during the tax increase discussion. Was it's harder to want to do a tax increase unless you have addressed the core issues. I know there needed to be one, and I think anybody who says otherwise doesn't understand the budget. But what that number is or whatever, you can have some disagreement on it. But the idea that how does this impact that? All those things are taken into account. So I'm in for hybrid. I'm good for taking a look at some options. My preference would be money spent now. My preference, as I've thought through this for a year, is would be mainly road based. Just for my preference. I mean, I'm just one of us. So.
See, that's the tough thing right now too, that we talked about this morning, that we talked about this at the last council meeting. I mean, we just refinanced $35 million, right? At 1/4 of a point and 1/2 a point. So not 2.5%, at 0.5% and 1/4%. So the other, I'm not advocating us borrow more money, and that's not what I'm saying at all. But I mean, I think you also have to look to say if you've got $100 million that you can invest to make 3%, and out of that $100 million you're making 3%, and your cost of funds right now is 1/4%, then you easily could take that $100 million as a revenue bond, or however you want to structure that, and say, okay, look, we're setting this $100 million aside, and we want to leverage that. There's a 2.25% spread that we would be making.
That's a scenario where it's advantageous to the taxpayer to borrow money.
Yeah, because I mean, again, I'm not advocating us borrow more money, but who would have thought that we'd refinance $35 million that we budgeted 2.5% in interest, and our average cost of funds was 0.3%. So, anyway.
Let me share though, when the rates went down for borrowing, they went down for investments too.
Sure.
Earning 3% is probably if you already had the investment in place before COVID. Really? Is it gone back up?
I mean, we're going to get 3% on the hand.
Oh, that's true. They're paying it. I'm thinking about once we get it, the investment on our side. But yes, on their side they are.
That's right. So on this particular on the hand, we're getting 3.3, I think, percent.
True.
No matter what. I mean,
Once we get it, it may not be that high.
One other, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No. I was just going to say, so I think y'all have a charge to come back with some scenarios that the council can look at, Aaron, that y'all just say, here's 3 or 4 different scenarios, and out of this CIP, we would look at, like what Rick's talking about on, a great example is Cherry Lane, that, there's a bunch of property right now that's not on the tax rolls, that if you build a 5-lane road through there, that people will start buying that property to invest, that will then come back on the tax rolls. So there may be things that we look at to look at that way.
Sure. One last thing, is everybody, and I don't mean this in a way to put it on the spot, but it's really to help them. I mean, I think I know the answer to this, based on what we've talked about in the past. Is everybody pretty comfortable that they would like to, because we need to give y'all some parameters, and I mean, the spend it all, is anybody up for spending it all? I mean, I think what we talked about when we looked at math a few months ago was, getting $100 million into something like this, I felt like it was the bare minimum, because at that point, we're going to double our revenue source via what we had at coming from MED. Based on a 4% distribution rate plus the taxes we get from Middle Tennessee Electric, that's a $6 million net revenue versus a $3 million net revenue that we used to have. So is everybody cool with y'all having parameters that at least $100 million is going in, or does anybody want? I mean, the 4 people want. Does anybody want to have a choice? I'm just trying to give you guys
I appreciate it.
range.
That makes sense.
Rather than y'all coming back to us with a range of spend it all the way out to spend none.
Yeah.
I think, maybe narrow that range a little bit. Does that make sense?
You're looking at 100 million with the interest, because I mean the graph that we've got here, investment fund shows over 15 years, we'd be at 101 million.
I'm just trying to get it in some range. I'm just trying to get it to where they're not bringing back options to us to
Right.
spend it all.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
So are we all good with this?
They're not going to do that.
Well,
Yeah.
Yeah, we have, what Eddie is talking about, we had heard 100 million before, and we kind of structured out 100 million into a spreadsheet here so you could see. Now, on my spreadsheet I have in front of my computer, I can put any number in you want and come out with whatever it takes, but that's what 100 million would look like. It would net, there'd be $11.5 million going in every year into the investment fund. You come out with a little over 100 million at the end of 15, and then it would leave you the available funds. If you drop down on that chart a little bit, it shows what funds then would be available. Now that's what's available. It doesn't mean that's what you'd spend every year, because the council would still sit down with the CIP, make the decisions every year, and the available funds would be used either to finance that, or like we did last year, we're not going to do anything really, and we're going to just push everything out, and we would go in the investment fund and sit there until we needed it another year. And so that's just an example.
What do you think about like four different scenarios: 100, 150, 175, 200 million at the end of 15 years? That's what would be.
that includes the annual.
That includes, yeah. And even if you want to go up to 250, go all the way from 100 to 250, and then I think the other part would be good to have in there is what's available, but then also what that contributes to our operating budget in not having to spend in debt service. That because this would be money that would not hit the debt service.
Right. Would not. Yeah. Hit the debt.
Would that be good for
debt service?
that'd give us six. Place to start.
Right.
That doesn't mean that's what it's limited to, but that would be a good start, and we can still expand on if we need to. We want to tweak something in there. Any likelihood that even if we said X number of dollars,
Yeah.
if we identify a project that we think is the perfect project, and then it happens to be 50 million, 52 million instead of 50, well, obviously it's going to be 52,
And I would add, I think it needs to be an annual discussion, just like the CIP, on what we're doing, because each year it could be adjusted. So we could set it up to be 125 million, and then council decide a couple of years, let's do 150, and we can just adjust how much contribution is going in that.
For me, the discussion, getting the put back money, I think outright it, sign it, goes away, let's cut my hand, somebody, a little blood handshake, that's my opinion on it.
Yeah, I understand.
We put away.
There's just a lot of factors in the future that you just don't know what's going to happen.
I gotta go to this Zoom call.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, man, I'm sorry.
No.
Go ahead, ma'am.
This is a new situation for the history of the city council. We've never had this kind of option. It's like winning the lottery with millions of dollars. It's very tempting to be careless, but what we need to do, we need to look at and cover all the bases. Even in winning the lottery, they give you options. You want it all at once. You want it by monthly, yearly, or whatever. We need to really look down the road in the future and see what impact that's going to have on the city, and also decision-making issues that are going to be with the future council members. The hybrid I was listening to everyone's comments. That's like spend some, save some. But with that, here again, like Mr. Martin said, how did we get in the situation we got in? And at this point, are we still going down that wrong path? Well, not wrong, but maybe not the smartest financial situations. Whichever route I feel that we go, whether it's with the present city manager or with the future city manager, we should not put the burden of letting he or she have full reign on any portion of this money spending without coming to the council for approval. So that's just kind of my take on it, just listening to you all.
There's never that scenario. The money has to be appropriated, so it has to come back to council. So I don't think that would be ever a request nor
no, I didn't
accomplish it.
Mr. Kendall, I didn't mean it that way. I'm just saying this is a new financial package for us. No other council has ever had this kind of money handed to them. And I'm just saying, making that statement, not particularly at you, I'm saying future. You know, sometimes we can get careless. And in other words, I'd like to definitely see accountability financially on everything that's going to be spent through the money we receive. That's what I'm saying.
What's the term on that recently financed money? Is that 15?
No, it was going to end the same time the original loan would
So
have
it's
ended.
just filling out the term of
We're
the
just finishing the
existing-
term.
So it's five years, is it? Or? Are they two
2008. Trying to think how many years are left.
3?
Maybe 5.
I think 3.
I don't know.
The water
Lot
had
shorter.
longer.
The water was
We were
longer.
converting variable
Yeah.
A little
to
bit
fixed.
higher.
Is that
We
what-
were converting variable to fixed, and we went out in the market and we got a premium, so our principal went down.
Right.
Our interest rate
The interest rate's actually like 5%.
5%, but because of our principal went down, our effective rate is what we're talking about here,
Right.
which is
All-in cost.
right less than 1%.
I got you.
We'll make one more comment just to help provide guidance so that, you know, I think it's good, Rick, you're making great points related to let's create at least some parameters so that we give some guidance for you to spend your time on so you're not wasting your time to do that. But a couple things. One, and I think any of us sitting in this room right now could probably look at the CIP or think through, hey, now that we've got access to this money, here's something that has been a priority, a need that we haven't had, and this is something that we really need to do. And so let's do it now that we have the opportunity to do it. That's very easy to do. It's not, you know, it's not hard to look around our city and see things that we'd like to invest in. With that being said, you know, to me, the easiest time for us to set the precedent for preservation of these funds is today. It's real easy to say, you know, from a human behavior standpoint, we're going to do that next month, next quarter, next budget cycle, next CIP, and then there never becomes a next budget or next CIP where we actually do that because maybe the same people aren't making the same decisions. So I think it's a very strong precedent to come out and say we're going to preserve this out of the gate. What's my point? Beyond just the obvious of what I've stated, I think that I would be also in favor of some sort of system that preserved more of the money up front and allowed more latitude later in the process as that pot builds to ensure that the pot does build rather than us getting in and tampering with it or someone else getting in and tampering with it, which I think sets a good precedent long term to do that. So the only other thing I say is, you know, Rick's using the number 100. We're talking about $270 million total, rough math, as far as setting the minimum of setting aside, or 300. I'm looking at this.
72.
272 is the
273.
full payout or whatever.
272 without interest.
Right. Right. So I'd probably be more in a minimum of a 200 is where I would be. Just so you know, and that I may be the only person that thinks that. So I may be the only person that wants to do that. But I'd lean that much further in that direction, just for staff to know.
Just before we leave this topic, I wanted to let you know that Jim Murphy with Bradley is here. He wrote the memo that I circulated to you back in March and then last week, and if anyone had, it appears that the conversation is and discussion is going a different direction right now. But if anyone had any specific questions for him about any of those options, I wanted to take advantage of the fact that he is here. So if you had questions, we might have some answers.
Personally, I would say I've got probably a pretty long list of them, questions, but I'm not real sure where to spot. Yeah, imagine that. Where it's, spot to be able to get, I don't know if we're there yet. Now that this conversation has transpired, I think if he's going to act as some kind of outside counsel to us in this, I think what I would say is that we're going to certainly need to figure out, however it is that we decide to do this, or whatever it is we're trying to achieve by doing what we do, is we're going to need some legal help to get there, and just make it happen. And I'm sure there are some things, some ways you can go, some things you can and can't do, but there's going to be different ways to skin the cat, I'm sure. But one easy, simple question that might be able to attack today is just about the investment restrictions and sort of what is a general, not a specific, but what is some general language as it relates to what typically constitutes an avenue to have those restrictions lessened.
While Jim's coming up, my printing cut off 1 year. There's 15 payments usually.
So one of you made an earlier comment, which is very appropriate, which is this is a very unusual situation for a local government to have, a significant amount of money. Obviously, there are limits on investments when the money is being held by the local government. There are less limits if it's held by an entity that's not the local government, such as a trust or some other nonprofit. The difficulty is control. How do you maintain control over the funds when you're putting it into a separate entity versus maintaining it in your accounts where the general rules that are applicable to local government funds are applied? So there's not a real clear, easy answer to that. I think the real answer is going to be when you get to the point where you decide what you'd like the structure to be, we would need to go sit down with the comptroller and just go through that with them and say, this is what we'd like to do. We think these monies will not be considered local government funds legally, and so therefore they're not subject to the same limitations that other local government funds are, even though you've got an ability through the structure that you create to get money coming back to you over time. While it's not in your hands, we think we can structure it such that it would not be subject to those limitations. That's just a very general description, but I think that's what the goal would be to see if there's a way that we can get the structure such that you're comfortable with it from the standpoint that it works, from the standpoint of the money goes to an outside entity and as then comes back to you when it's needed. There are similar structures around that we're familiar with that we think will work, and so that's what we're, foundations or charitable trusts, things like that we think will work. But until we actually create the instrument and then have them review it, that will be the ultimate decision. But I think the idea first is to figure out what you want to do, then we can try to draft it up and come up with a way to do that.
I had a conversation with Mr. Tucker in the last several days about some of these things, so I appreciate you.
He warned me of that.
Being available based on some of those discussions. Of course, at that time, wasn't real sure which direction this conversation was going to go. But I'm sure that it will get more technical and more legal.
Yeah, because we also have to worry. I mean, we've got to structure it so that we can avoid any federal tax issues as well. But I think we've looked at that a little bit, and we think that's doable. But I think ultimately we've got to look
at exactly what kind of structure you want so that we can then structure, create that structure and then go through the process of getting that approved through whatever approval mechanisms that would be applicable. And those vary depending on which models you use. And so that's why there's no definitive answer, but we think there's a path forward that can work, that we can structure around.
For the record for you guys, kind of the premise of that conversation was the idea of kind of two main topics. One, being able to have some investment flexibility if in fact this is going to be a 50 or 100 year or plus type investment. Number two was the capability to replace that income. To make sure that the income is replaceable via either that same tool or a different tool, but to be able to make sure we're able to do that so our net revenue numbers are positive.
Glad you did. Any other questions? Thank you.
I have one. Hold on a second. Has the closing occurred?
Yes.
And the check, the closing check have we created it? Okay. Okay. Check cleared the bank. Didn't bounce. That's good. That's a good thing. Good sign. And but that was like something like $43 million, so or $40-something million. So are we doing something with that?
It was. I can't remember the exact number. For some reason, I think it was 33, and part of that was because $10 million is being held in escrow.
Right at the final thing.
But that will come to us in the next year to 18 months.
Okay. And one thing concerning, we have another example in our community where the hospital sold and they created the Christy Houston Foundation. Is that the kind of model that makes any sense, or is
it's definitely one of the models that we would consider, yes.
Okay. Well, because I think the one thing that has proven over the years is that it's creating a sustained resource for our community, and I think that's what maybe Ronnie and some of the others trying to create something that's sustainable over a long period of time that can be something benefiting our community in the long run. So I'm real interested in something like that, or that kind of model to work. And then I guess the council would act as the board. Is that what or how does that work?
We'd have to look at that as to whether you would be the board or whether you would appoint independent board members, and so that there could be a degree of independence, and that might be important for the comptroller so that it wouldn't look like this was just a governmental entity holding the money. And so those are the things that we would have to balance. There's not a clear answer to that, but I would probably discourage it being the council. I wouldn't discourage council members being part of the board, and maybe even the council, or the council approving the board. I just think we've got to look at separation from the standpoint of avoiding too much of someone saying, "Oh, this is really not a separate entity."
Gotcha.
That's my concern there.
Thank you.
I guess the one thing that we need to clear up is there's not really an option as far as the lottery of getting the money up front or getting the money as a payoff, and all that was done in the contract. Basically, the payments over the next 15 years have all been established. I guess with whatever number we choose to put into the trust, for lack of a better term, we'll basically be choosing almost a Christy Houston type scenario where we will have board members who will determine what money would be released back to us. I would encourage us all to think of that money that would be coming back to us to be coming back to us more for capital type projects, and never use that money for reoccurring expenses, because if you were to look at it as reoccurring expenses, then you're only expanding your budget and manipulating it by transferring the money to a different account. And I don't think that's the intent. I think when we say that we're going to do a draw against that investment, it needs to go towards a park or a building or a fire station. It needs to go to something that is direct capital that's not going to have
something that's going to just be looked at it as reoccurring expenses, because I think that's very important that we not set ourselves up for, when the $17 million a year stops rolling in here, that you've got reoccurring expenses based on that $17 million as a basic annual income. And so,
There's a couple different things. We're talking about the 70 million coming in.
right.
I mean, that's what I'm talking about is an annual income that would be basically, for lack of better terms, it's really a distribution. It's not an interest payment.
Right.
Essentially, a distribution from the pool of money. And I think for our discussions, we probably got to talk about this like it's all here, all at once, just so we can, because it's going to be impossible for us to talk about every single year and what happens. But just in general terms, we have money that comes to our unrestricted general fund, and have had that money come in for a long,
Right.
80, whatever it is, 70, 80 years. We need to replace that money to our operating budget.
Right.
Not CIP, our operating budget. The argument is
It'd be nice if you wean that off. $3 million on a $200 million budget, or closing in on a $200 million budget, isn't a significant adjustment to compensate for the lack of funds that will be coming from MED. Although I do think it's important that the money be covered in that expense. And I guess you wouldn't get a draw against this for 15 years, would you? You could, but you wouldn't want to, would you? Because you're already getting whatever.
In terms of an interest or a distribution draw, I would say absolutely would. It would just be a smaller number because there'd be less dollars in the fund.
But when you just let that roll over and stay into the fund, or you're going to pull the interest off to try and target a number at the end that would be fixed, not based on any fluctuation in interest rates over the years. Because if you don't do the whole 17 million, and let's say right now we're saying 5 million gets it 100 million in 15 years. If you did 10 million into that fund, you got $200 million, as Ronnie had referenced. If you were doing that, then you're still got $7 million of additional income that's coming into the city currently, compensate for that $3 million that you've lost. So you lose 3, now you've got an additional 4, basically, million, which is not a landfall as far as, but that's not, I don't think that's what this money should be looked at. I don't think it should be looked at as lottery money. Daddy Warbucks just died and left us an inheritance. We need to look at it as shrewd investment and return on that investment. And of course, 15 years from now, $3 million won't be what $3 million is today. So I think that's probably the understanding that I would lean a little more towards Ronnie's number of, if it takes $100 million to generate $3 million today, then 15 years from now, you probably want to have 150 or 175 million in there so that your return is greater and you have hedged against inflation. With me?
I think it's just how you look at it, whether or not you're looking at it as from a CIP standpoint, and you're garnering less debt and less debt service.
Right.
Or you're just using it as income. The fact of the matter is, the way that just simplicity's sake is, we've had $3 million coming into our operating budget from this asset for many years. And I guess we could say, well, all of a sudden, because we sold it, we can just get rid of that $3 million. You could say that and just let all this build up for some future day, and that could be an argument that could go forever.
All right.
300 million turns into $1 billion, and the city's never benefited from it, never done anything.
Right.
We just got rid of $3 million worth of services that we used to provide.
Right. There has to be some return for what the asset we've given away. Yes.
That the city benefits from it, at least equal to the $3 million a year that we were getting, in my mind.
Right.
That's kind of we need to at least be benefiting from this asset, whether it's in a cash form or in, you can probably see. I'm sorry, we're yapping.
That's fine. I'm just here in case there's any other questions. But part of what you're asking, how the money gets distributed, will be governed by whatever documents you create. If you're going to create, like, for example, a trust or an agreement, whatever that agreement says can govern, how the money comes back,
Right.
what the money can be used for. You can tie the trustees' hands in a trust and say you can only give it for specific purposes. The question is, y'all have to decide what those specific purposes are so that you can decide whether it's just for capital projects or it's for operating and capital or whatever. Those are all things that are on the table. Thank you.
I guess it's safe to assume that there will be borrowing in the future, though, because, I mean, there will always be those snapshots and fire stations and potentially schools or whatever that might be out there that the city would build that would have to have money borrowed to compensate for that bump in the budget. But
I do think it's interesting. I would like to know what the reappraisal of all the assets are and what that's going to do to the things. I think, to me, that'd be important as a part of this decision-making process. That'd be important.
Yeah. We'll talk to the assessor and see when that can get done.
Questions? All right, let's move to budget and financial update and the May dashboard information.
Y'all have the May dashboard, and I'm available if you have any questions on it. It's following the same format as the previous dashboards.
Questions? All right, you have a couple of beer permits in front of you.
We do. We have a new restaurant location at 2705 Old Fort Parkway, Suite Inn. And we have the Axe Range, which had already had an ownership, beer permit rather. They're having an ownership change, so they're needing to get a new beer permit. The summaries are behind this main page, and they lack their building codes inspections, but their background checks are okay for us to issue. Once they pass their building codes inspections, if you approve them today, we'll do that when they're ready.
Second. Motion second. Ms. Wright, please call the roll.
Vice Mayor Scales Harris. Okay. Mr. LaLance?
Aye.
Okay, good. Thank you. Mr. LaLance?
Aye.
Mr. Martin?
Aye.
Mr. Shacklet?
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman?
Aye.
Mr. Wade?
Aye.
Mayor McFarland?
Aye. All right, we'll move. Any statements to be paid?
No, sir.
All right, I want to ask Councilman Shacklet, I know many of us watched the school board meeting last night, but Councilman Shacklet, can you just give us an update on?
Yeah, I'll get where you can hear me. It was a wonderful meeting last night. I tell you, the conscientious work of our school board and particularly the staff at Murfreesboro City Schools is just impressive to see that team work. It's an honor to them, but also an honor to the team that Dr. Gilbert put around her. They just did a wonderful job of presenting options in a difficult time for city schools to figure out all to be flexible, but also have some definitive assurances as to what could take place in the future. And I wanted to just point out some of the things that were in a letter that's being sent to our parents this week, and it's that they will have an option. Traditional classrooms are what they're calling choice distance learning, and they're asked to submit their choice by July the 31st. Parents will can change their selection at the end of the 9-week grading period. And under that approved plan, the students will return to either in-person or through choice distance learning beginning August the 10th. There's some additional protocols, very detailed work, how to handle the specifics of a school day, how to keep the children as isolated as possible within their classrooms and provide an educational environment that's safe not only for the students but for the teachers and for the staff as well. Encouraging people to social distance, And it's just a lot of different details that the parents are giving some information, and the teachers are giving some guidance on how the school day will look. It's not going to look the same. It's going to look different. There won't be cafeteria. The kids won't be in the cafeteria. Their lunch will be brought to their classroom. But the thing that really struck me was how intentional and specific they were with this choice distance learning. There's 6.5 hours of instructional that'll be delivered via Zoom or other online platforms. And then the schools will have hard copy instruction. So it's not just do it when you want to, there's going to have teachers that will be designated as the online instructors and provide instruction, guided instruction, so that 6.5 hours is productive time for those children that feel for whatever reason that they are not able to use come to in-school learning. So that distance learning is going to be productive and effective, and it's just a good way of providing that. Now, ESP will begin on July the 20th. For folks that are needing to use ESP. And the neat thing about there's enough detail in the plan to get us moving forward and to have reasonable expectations for parents and for staff and for the teachers and for the students. But it also allows enough flexibility that at any point during the academic year, the school can switch to what is considered a hybrid model, a more hybrid model than this, or all distance learning given whatever circumstances the pandemic might present for us. I just want to commend them for the work that they did, Mr. Ringstaff, Mr. Anderson, all the teachers and the staff at the administration have worked long hours and contributed to this. Several surveys were done, 2 for the parents, 1 for the teachers, and also 1 for the community. So they're trying to get quantitative data to be able to make these decisions, and I thought they've done an excellent job of showing us a path forward for education in the coming year, and they certainly need to be commended by our council for the work that they've done, and continue to pray for them, because there's decisions made every day given whatever circumstances we have to face. There's going to be some hard decisions that they're going to have to make going forward, and just pray for their wisdom and guidance and discernment going forward. But they do need to be commended for the work that they've already done. Thank you, Mayor.
Like most decisions that you're making during this pandemic, they're no-win decisions.
Yeah.
So I watched it last night. I felt for Mr. Ringstaff that he's in a position that he was not anticipating being in, but he's there for a reason. So that's right. All right. Any other questions? Comments? Anything from staff?
Nothing further.
All right. We'll stand adjourned.